So I have 6:32 and everyone from the task force is here. So I will call the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force December 30th, 2021 meeting to order. I think we get the prize for being the committee that met last for 2021. I don't think anybody's got anything scheduled past us. So, you know, what is it? The hardest working committee in the town, maybe. So I'll just do a quick roll call. Gordon Brockway.
Here.
Scott Hopkinson.
Here.
David Hessel.
Here.
Gail Heyer.
Here.
And I'm Mark Howell, and I'm also here. And we're holding this meeting virtually on Zoom under the rules that permit that from the state of Massachusetts during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will, to the extent, whenever necessary, take our votes via roll call. So thank you all for joining. And we'll kind of dive right in. As is our practice, I'm looking for a volunteer clerk for tonight's December 30th meeting.
Well, I'll keep plugging away at it if you like. If you like the results of the last one, I can keep doing it.
Scott, it's amazing that you were able to turn those around in like 15 minutes after the last meeting.
I just do it during the meeting. So then I do is just quick pass afterwards and I'm done.
Okay.
But I think that's the only way I can do it. The other way is it takes way too long. So.
Yeah, impressive. So if you're willing,
thank you.
Somebody else's, more power to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
And so with respect to that, and moving on to minutes from previous sessions, we do have for review the October 7th, which were kind of long missing minutes that are available. Did everybody get a chance to take a look at them? And does anybody have any comments or questions? I believe I can pull them up if we need to.
So Mark, it might be useful for me to pull up my copy, which Gail gave you some markups on. I don't know.
That'd be fine.
I actually got it all queued up here.
Great. Even better. I know I went through them and I'm trying to see whether I closed them. I found, especially since I was basically reading them off of recollection from previous, I found them perfectly fine. There were, a few.
Well, Gail had a couple fairly minor, but straightforward ones. Can you see the screen there?
Not yet.
I pushed share. My machine is a little slower. I have
Looks like it's trying. There we go. Yep.
I don't have the zippiest machine in the world that I use for my day-to-day work. So my homework. Lots of storage space, but not a lot of. I don't want to. Okay. So this is the version with track changes that was returned by Gail earlier today. And you can see over in the right-hand column where the comment showed up. And so you can see that on pages 1, 2, 3, 4, it wasn't until page 5 that we have any comments. And so Gail clarified her own comment that she made in the meeting. And I'm okay with accepting that. If everyone else is, you can see it on the screen, and then we'll go to the next one. Then if no comments, then we'll go to the next one. Over.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next one is here. Also, Gail clarified a comment that she specifically made. So including some punctuation and other things like that.
Yeah.
And I believe that was it. So what I would
the only small one I had was on page 3, the section about master address table.
There. This one?
Yeah. So the line there that stands off the actual premises or premise, I corrected that to read is a list of the actual addresses in town.
How's that?
Yeah. just
Okay.
because I was describing what that was. And it, you know,
Cool.
and let
Okay.
me see what the other one was.
Oops.
I mean, like I said, I found a couple of mostly typos, but Minuteman Media Network could use some capitalization at the top of page 6. And when you made the comment about the PEG access, so Minuteman, one word, Media Network. And in the middle of that same page, when it says mark 56 of these properties. So I thought that comment was a possible target of 10 years to complete. So when it says possible 10-year, sorry, you're jumping around. It's page 6.
Yeah. That's on page 3. Find the next.
Yeah, that's a different comment.
There it is.
It was right after the section where, so yeah, of these properties. And so I think I was speculating that if there was a possible target of 10 years to complete, then you'd have to do 5.6 streets cabled each year and figure out how much it takes to pay for it. So I just thought that needed a little, just to make it easier to follow. And that was it.
Okay. I'm going to save it as a track changes, and then I'm going to save it as a non-track changes and accept the changes. And then I guess I would make a motion that we accept these minutes as modified per what we just reviewed.
I actually have a question first.
Sure.
And I didn't put it in my track changes because it just didn't make sense to me. So I wanted to ask, and this might have been the meeting where I kind of came and went because I was traveling. At the bottom of page 3, the discussion about Verizon and fiber, and we were talking about, so I guess just the last 2 lines there. It says Verizon does provide ISP services. Last use fiber service leased from Verizon. Concord purchased ISP services, who in turn leased dark fiber from Verizon. So
That should be last mile, Mark. I think that's.
So I think we were talking about the fact that somebody asserted that Verizon doesn't have fiber in town. And I was pointing out that Verizon does in fact actually provide some fiber services in town to business customers.
okay.
So they don't have a FiOS service that one can buy, but Concord used Verizon as its ISP a long time ago. And one of the current ISPs that does provide service to Concord uses Verizon, gets to Concord's head end via Verizon fiber. So it's actually the broad point was fiber is available to business customers who are willing to pay, those business services rates more or less on custom deals. So if somebody wants to clarify that, that's.
So I've added 3 lines just as you were
Yeah.
talking, and I think that covers it.
Sure.
So what I said is Verizon does provide some fiber services in town to some business customers. Concord used Verizon as its ISP provider, and one of the
In
services.
the past, maybe say that.
Okay. And it may be one of the services to the Concord broadband head end
Yeah,
is Verizon fiber lease line.
right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I mean, that's a little in the weeds, but that's what we were talking about.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'll do that after the fact, but I'll just go back to the so the motion would be.
Right. So
To
Scott moved to accept the October 7th minutes as modified on the screen. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Gordon. And any further discussion about the October 7th minutes? Okay, so we could take a vote. All those in favor, Gordon,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Gail,
Yes.
and myself, yes. So that'll be unanimous.
Okay. And I've so noted.
Okay, and we do not yet have the December 9th, as David mentioned earlier, and so we'll deal with them when we do get them. But we did have a distribution of December 23rd minutes right after the meeting last week. So if people have had an adequate chance to review that, we can discuss any updates. And I did have, I think, one small change on that one too. And I haven't mailed it to you, but I can read it out.
All right. Hold on a second. I'll present those. Give me a second.
Actually,
And
too.
let me make sure I create a new version. I do a lot of versioning to just, so I have a way, breadcrumbs. Okay.
Okay, so I believe it's top of page 3 in the line that starts mark we should put forward. So it's the word marks actually. So modify marks to mark, and the suggestion was we should put forward. Let me just. When you go full screen, I can't see what I'm reading. So I said we should put forward straw man recommendations with the pro and con considerations. So the idea here, and this is a good place to start because we'll work on this some more tonight. When we write our report, we should probably take a position, or a default position where we can about what we think the recommendation is about. But I believe that it's also a good idea for us to, bring the pro and con arguments or to that report too, as best we can, so that whoever we're aiming the recommendation at has the information to weigh it adequately. Recognizing, and I believe the gist of the comment that I was making was recognizing that we may not be completely representative of the community. It would behoove us to try to both inform and recommend. So hopefully that captures that idea. Is that fairly clear to everyone? Yeah.
Okay.
Just a little further down there on the same page. I think the word existing should see where it says Gordon Brockway. In a way, we have some cost, and I think the next line was kind of a question: is the existing crew going to get us to our goals? Was what Gordon was saying.
Got it.
Yeah, so I just inserted the word existing before crew, just because I think that's what at least my recollection of what we were talking about at that point. And let's see, did I have anything else? Not really. I mean, there's a few spelling capitalization things, but I think that's it. Anybody else?
Nope.
Are we ready for a motion?
I'm ready for, I move that we accept the minutes from October 23rd as modified.
Second.
I think you meant December 23rd.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Who was the
Okay.
second? Who seconded? David?
Gordon.
Gordon.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? So we're ready for a vote. Gordon,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Gail. Sorry, can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muted. Yes.
Okay, and myself, Mark, aye. So that'll be unanimous as well. And thank you so much for all your work on that, Scott.
I'm glad to finally get us a little more caught up.
So just turning our attention to item 3 on the agenda, the chair's report. As I mentioned last week, the light board did meet yesterday, and as part of that meeting, they covered the budget, or what they call the forecast for 2022, and for both electric and broadband, and it will make it was a strong presentation. Actually, I thought it was one of the stronger ones that I've seen. I think they were quite succinct and well prepared, and particularly Scott, Matt Cummings and Laura Scott did a really nice job. I think
Yeah.
it's understandable. Couple of yeah.
Was unfortunately I didn't have a chance to attend that because of work. Was any of that material shared, and or I guess the video will be up eventually?
Yeah, Gordon, maybe you can weigh in on that.
Yeah, they asked me not to forward the budget because it will get distributed to the public, but only with redaction. So let me see.
I did grab some screenshots of things that they showed at the meeting and could share those. I think that would be okay since they were already shared in a meeting.
Yeah.
With respect to broadband.
Yeah, I took some screenshots too, but it looks like as if my computer rebooted before I thought to save it out, maybe.
Yeah. So
Okay, well, maybe the first thing is, geez, yeah, if any of you would share any of your screenshots with me, I'd be curious to see.
Yeah.
So that's my request to you, gentlemen. And then also, as soon as the recording is available, I'll take a look at it.
Right. So what I'll do is I will right now, I think, bring up some of those elements that I think are particularly, important for what we're talking about. And I think my understanding from what David Wood reported was that they will be posting a version of the presentation on the CMLP website once they redact some of the proprietary information about power costs. So there are some things that go to the light board that are considered confidential to the board, which is why the version that Gordon has is not appropriate for distribution. So let me see how well this works, and maybe we can. So the telecoms, and really just the telecom section. The telecom section began with this chart, which is a 5-year capital plan for broadband, and they basically outlined, highlighted two things in this area that I'm highlighting right here is fiscal 24 to 26 expectation of some conduit improvements, I think aimed at the business districts, if I recall right, because there are some areas where the conduit's pretty insufficient in the downtown areas. And so that was something, and I believe they expect that they may be able to get some funding for some pandemic relief funding to help support that. And the other thing that they highlighted was $250,000 basically in general plant expenses, which would represent some core upgrade work to be done in 2022. And I think those were the highlights of the capital plan. Gordon, did you have
Yeah,
any?
my handwritten notes were equivalent. But
Yeah.
you know, when we were reviewing the map, the GIS map and the coverage, did
Yeah.
it pop out at you that there was a deficiency that needed addressing with regard to the business district? I didn't notice that.
It is a fact that is a problem, and no, it doesn't come. It's not something that you would be able to understand by examining the public maps in the way that we've done that.
Okay, and the point being that maybe we might want to revisit our approach to the data to see what data we need in order for such a deficiency to emerge or be visible.
I agree with that. And part of the reason that is challenging is because at the core areas of the town, there's a lot of fiber that passes through there. It's just kind of like, an interstate highway going through the center of a town. You can't necessarily get off there. There's to use an analogy, but that's the issue is, and in some of the downtown areas in particular, and I think they said this was related to something like a street lighting project or something else that they were also working on. But in the downtown areas, obviously, it's very challenging to dig, and you can get into a lot of can't get there from here scenarios. So I'm pleased to know they have an interest in working on it. It'd be interesting to hear more about the details of that project. It wasn't something I was aware of. I was aware of some of the challenges that have presented themselves in the past. And if you do look at the broadband availability map, you will see individual buildings, right along Main Street and so forth, that are listed as unavailable. And a lot of times the core issue there is you can't get the last 100 feet, or there's no appropriate conduit that actually enters that building. And so many of those have been learned by basically going out and trying to do it. So those were the key highlights there. There is, let's see. Okay, I probably need to open something else. So in terms of facts that were mentioned during the presentation, there are apparently 2 open line worker positions and 1 telecom tech position open at the moment. So I guess, from the perspective of how's the staffing going, that's a reasonable question. And let's see, let me just open a few of these so that I can kind of go right down through it.
Just out of curiosity, while you're looking, how many staff do we have on broadband these days? Did they mention that?
2 network engineers, a director, and there are open positions for 4 telecom technicians.
4.
Yeah, so I guess that would mean they currently have 3, which was the staffing level for a long time.
All right, so I'm sorry, for 4 telecom
technicians.
And they would be used only for broadband installs, or would they be doing other things as well?
Well, they're primarily for broadband installations and servicing, obviously.
Hey, Mark, I had an idea. Why don't I open the document and we can, I'll share it.
That sounds good.
Just go to the different pages.
Yeah, maybe that's easier to go down through them.
So I'll share my screen.
And probably the other thing I think is really relevant for us is the notion that the plan is built around an assumption of about 350 new subscriptions for 2022, which would be probably an all-time high in terms of new subscribers, but that's what they built it on. Okay. So
I'm on page 109, and this is telecom debt service. And I just thought you guys would be interested in taking a look at this.
yeah.
And it doesn't include the formalized debt that basically the light plant lent broadband.
Yeah, Gordon, that's something I'm not familiar with.
This is page 109.
It was
Yeah.
done as a result of an audit report that suggested that the broadband business was getting the benefit of an asset that they kind of hadn't paid for or something.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I'm not an accountant, so or a lawyer or anything. So, but it's something along the lines of each business has to be a standalone entity. So even if it is given seed capital, there's an obligation for it to ultimately return the capital. And when I questioned that in meeting once, it was told to us that look, we just don't have a choice on this. The auditors told us to do it.
Okay.
But I still kind of push back on that a little bit. That they couldn't have made us do it if we didn't have it. And whether or not we had it is actually a matter of basically how you present reality. So maybe that's not a good way of explaining my viewpoint. It's more along the lines of, look, how quickly do we get to profitability, quote profitability? A lot of assumptions go into that. And anyway, if we could have spread that capital payment out, postponed it a bit, and spread it out over a longer period of time, that might have given us some breathing room to do some more.
Well, that was the original model. The original model had those spread out over, per the model, I think it was 5 years, and the original amount, which was first 1 million and then a subsequent $1 million.
Yeah.
So,
well, so we should draw a distinction. What this was an internal loan from CMLP to the Broadband Division. So I'm a parent, if you loan your kid some money,
so Mark,
and they
you
have
say,
to pay it, or you even claim that you're charging them rent for their room or something like that. What's really going on there? What this chart represents is actual money borrowed through bonds from from somebody else, which is clearly cash.
Yeah.
Right. The internal loan concept, I think, I don't know if this is even the scope of this meeting, but I got to say that when we set this up, it was very clear, talking with the then town controller, that the business for the broadband had to be completely isolated from the light plant's ratepayer business. And if it wasn't, there was hell to pay, frankly. I mean, he was pretty adamant about that. And so that no resources, that's why we even put in the business of paying rent for the smart grid optical cable, because the ratepayers had paid $4 million for the purposes of putting that smart grid in. And you can't just go take that and use it for broadband business, which is a separate entity, a separate business, and not to the benefit of the ratepayers. And so that's why, this, anyway, I won't say anymore. I'm just.
So it'll be interesting to see, and I'd love to, and probably will when I get a chance to actually look at this, ask the question of, where are the payments for that being reflected on the budget in the forecast for the business, because I think that is an interesting question. Going back to that page 109 that you were on before, Gordon, though, what is detailed about that is there was $1 million authorized by town meeting to start the broadband business. And if you look at these various colored expansions, those add up to essentially $1 million. I think the gray bars is a little over 100,000. The yellow is 300,000. The orange, which has been retired. So at the middle of the graph, 2021, all of that is paid. So the original blue bars at the bottom of the legend was $100,000. That was repaid in 2018. 500,000 was repaid by 2021. 300,000 is in the process of being repaid with about a $40,000 a year payment schedule, and then a small, whatever it looks like, $12,000 a year payment schedule for the last $100,000. So that's really the beginning and the end of what town meeting authorized broadband to borrow at the time that it was being started. And the town meeting has previously authorized at a later town meeting an additional $1 million in borrowing should broadband need it. It would also be repaid from broadband. So there's at least as much done. The only rationale I can think of for owing the light plant money is that there was some equipment that was already purchased and in service for the smart grid network that was later used for broadband as well, that, you know, technically was owned by CMLP. And I suppose one could argue that broadband should pay for that equipment somehow, which you know, is certainly something that was debatable. But it's just, I think the main takeaway from this is that there's very little debt left on the balance sheet at the moment that's going anywhere other than just to the parent.
Well, so you say parent, what does parent mean? It can't be a
parent
parent. The light plant cannot be the parent of the broadband business. They cannot be coupled. They have to be isolated. I don't.
Well, so it's two divisions of the same. So there's the electric division, which has a whole ledger, and a broadband division inside the corporate entity called CMLP.
Okay.
So meaning that, technically everything that's not owned by broadband is owned by the electric side.
So what you're saying, Mark, is that the broadband business is being operated as a subsidiary to Concord Concord Light Plant, not as a separate entity.
Right, and so then the electric business is also operated that way. So in parallel, it's one, CMLP is an entity, and it has an electric operation and a broadband operation. In this budget, the first, I believe that, the first 100 pages of this is all the electric side. And then they have one consolidated top sheet at the top where they say electric operations contribute. In fact, I don't know if you
I probably have it here somewhere. If you want to look
captured
at it.
that.
Again, I don't have the benefit of being in the meeting or having a copy of this, whether
So
it's redacted or not. So I
think
guess
it was
we don't
page
need to spend
7
more
and
time on it right now, but maybe as soon as this stuff becomes available, once the power bit's been redacted, apparently there's 114 pages of documentation here.
Yeah, there are a great number. So it's just, it's interesting to know it is a budget. It's built around a certain amount of growth. Maybe look briefly at page 100.
Okay. Yeah, there I have it up, and that's the revenue, the two revenue categories. Well, really three. There's hardly any municipal, commercial, and residential, and it's predominantly residential. And I don't really see much growth in the commercial, to tell the truth.
No, the commercial's relatively flat.
Yeah,
and I think if you page ahead to page 102, that'll give it in numbers.
Can you make it a little bigger on the screen?
Sure.
Thank you. Great.
Let's see. So this is growth in sales,
Yeah.
about 9%. Revenue. Anyways, I always need a little bit of time to settle down and sort of concentrate on these things. Is this the 102 that you were asking
Yeah,
about?
102. So the line 14 there is the residential services, and line 16 is the commercial services. And municipal sales, as you can see, is just basically $3,000. So that's just the, and then there's some miscellaneous other revenues, but that's the whole revenue model for telecom.
Yeah.
I have just a really basic kind of question. Telecom Division, is that just broadband? Like, do they do anything else? Or I'm just curious why telecom seems kind of like a broader name than broadband.
It is. There are a few miscellaneous other things. So for example,
it should be on this page, actually.
The town operates a municipal fiber optic network for itself, and the school department uses a certain amount of that fiber to connect all the school buildings. So the Telecom Division is responsible for maintaining that and charges some, I think it may show up in this income M&J or other things. So there are some small dark fiber leases where essentially an organization, either some of the private schools and some of the communications companies use fiber to access their customers around, enterprise customers around town. And so it's pretty de minimis compared to everything else, but there are a few other things, and there's nothing to preclude the Telecom Division from offering other kinds of communication services using the fiber optic network or something else that they might decide to do. So that's one of the reasons why to call it telecom.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, those are probably good things to keep in mind about it, just as we're looking towards solutions and so forth. Is this so can you, one interesting thing to look at is line 24 on this page, installation fees. You can see the impact of expecting to install 350 customers would result in substantially higher installation fee revenue than has been seen in basically any previous year.
Well, it tells us that 2021 has a lower installation fee revenue than 2020.
Yeah,
that's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and prior to that, if it had been, so there was an accounting system change in 2019, which allowed that number to be broken out. So prior to that, the installation fees were sort of up in the sales line. So it's not it doesn't really accurately represent it, but there are years where those numbers have been higher, just based on how many installs were done.
Well, Mark, the chart that I forwarded to you, which was the net installs from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
If you wanted to look at that aspect of the business, that's probably a much more interesting chart. That's a single spreadsheet, which I've received and I forwarded to you. And we can put it up if you want. I can probably.
Yeah. Let's stick with. Let's finish out with the budget.
Yeah.
So I did, or if I didn't ask it, somebody did ask a question about marketing, and I think it was either me or Gordon, but I think the point of it was very much along the lines of the discussion that we've had previously about what is actually driving that growth, and there apparently is no actual line item represented in this budget that is marketing to drive that 350 installations. The expectation is that if they can do them faster, they'll happen. Am I mischaracterizing that, Gordon?
No, that's accurate.
Okay.
And it just seems to me that if we had a more differentiated array of offerings, that you could use marketing to say upsell for customers that have already made the connection. So it just, anyway, it's underdeveloped.
Yeah. So just moving on past that page, I think I have it on page 98. So 98 is the profit, sort of the telecom income and loss graphically, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I think this is reflective of what happens in the past. And 2019 in particular stands out as being a relatively highly profitable year, and that's what happens when you stop spending to do a lot of new installations and just let the subscription business run. You kind of almost immediately stop paying for growth and start reaping the rewards. And so 2020 and 2021 return a little bit to that. Although the big jump in total expense in 22 was attributed to the basically 2 headcount increase, a full year of a second network engineer when you only had 1, and a full year of a 4th telecom technician. So that, that kind of adds to the cost of and it would need to be supported by the higher revenue. So you can see it's also kind of clear, at least to me, that if those new installs don't happen, you could expect the revenue to be similar to 2021, which would not meet the forecast expense plan for 2022, just because that bar is bigger. So graphically, I thought this was quite interesting. And it really demands that they do focus on growth going forward.
I would have expected that expenses went down in 2020. That was when COVID hit. 2019 was before that. So they must have lost some people or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was there a big expense to deal with the outage or outages?
No. We did lose some headcount in 2019.
Okay.
So there was, I think at one point in late 2019, they got down to 2 telecom techs and 1 engineer, and there was a position called telecom coordinator, which I think has become the director position. But
yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So there was some expense underrun, I think, then, and that probably actually carried over some in 2020. But I agree with you. I would have expected 2020 to actually look a little bit better.
Well, but
So,
that also, that
I
loss of headcount could have caused some of the underperformance in 2020.
Yeah, I agree.
So just to give you a data point, that other chart that I mentioned, 2018, there was 274 net installs. I'll back up one more year. 2017, 300. The next year, 2018, 274. 2019, 271. 2020, 187. And 2021, 195. And what surprises me is this doesn't quite jibe with the message we got that they just dead stop installs during COVID. So I don't know how those 195 appeared.
Yeah, I don't think it was a complete stop.
Okay.
But they said that they did handle the emergency requests, and you probably got some move in and move outs.
Yeah, yeah. We just have the net number.
One
And
of
by the way, the highest was that back in 2016, they did 325. That was
Yeah.
the highest they ever did.
Yeah. A suggestion that I made, by the way, was that they include an average number of monthly subscriptions to go with the achievement and the actuals here, and a year-end subscriber level, which would make it a lot easier to kind of track how's this business growing, with respect to its revenue and profitability. But
So it was I'm trying to make notes. Net subscriptions or total
I
subscriptions?
thought it would make sense to do an average monthly subscription rate. So if you knew how many subscribers you had each month of the year and just averaged it, that number would be a pretty good proxy for when you were looking for one number that means the whole year. And then knowing what number you exit each year at tells you the absolute growth, because then you can go from one year to the next and say, because, if you plan for 350 new subscribers, let's say, you don't get them all in January or in December, but you can figure that on average, you had 175 more subscribers all year long.
Yeah, when I was trying to take the numbers from that other sheet that I mentioned, I modeled it by using every new install was on the average installed for 6 months.
Exactly.
And every existing install from the previous year was available for revenue for the full 12 months.
Yeah,
so I tried to work the numbers backwards as what their revenue should have looked like from that other chart.
Right. And that's a very effective way to do it. So if you have the average for the year and you have the final for the year, you can kind of make sense of the growth in revenue and profitability and everything. So, and Matt seemed to immediately recognize that, suggested that he do it. Anyway, so that was, I did think that page 7 was very interesting, Gordon. So this page is, we talked about CMLP combined here. So the gray bars on this page is the profitability of the electric business, and the blue bars are the profitability of the telecom business, and then the line running through them is combined. And so what you can see is that over the forecast time period, that the electric business has actually experienced some pretty substantial challenges, and the broadband business has at least been consistently in the black.
By the way, is that related to the rate stabilization fund that was consumed that may have made this?
It actually has to do with more to do with weather.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. But it does, it's also useful, I think, to understand kind of the order of magnitude of things too, is that even though telecom might be more profitable on a percent return basis, it is kind of, to some extent, dwarfed by whatever happens in electric.
So just out of curiosity, this was another data point along those lines. What's the total revenue the light plant collects on power?
It's probably on the next page, but I'm not sure. There it is. 34 million for 2022.
Yeah. And we're talking 1.5 or 1.2 for the broadband. So yeah, that definitely puts it in perspective.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That, unless there's further questions on that, I just thought it was, very useful. I think hopefully wasn't too much jumping around, but I think it is useful to understand kind of the order of magnitude of numbers that we're talking about here, and what there's a fairly detailed 5-year capital plan for the electric side as well. And I think that the staff is doing what they can to do it, and actually if they continue down the road they're doing, I think they are maturing the business.
Yeah, there was one other thing we talked about in the light plant meeting, and that was discussing this recent outage,
Hmm.
and that there were 6 fibers on Losbrook that got eaten. A 72 strand cable got eaten, got replaced, and then eaten again. And also the ISP had to replace some of their equipment too. I'm guessing that the ISP sends a cable through a fiber optic cable through the same conduit. They weren't very explicit about what was happening there. And so it seemed to me that they replaced these assets in a conduit without actually adequately ensuring that the animals were gone.
Yeah.
So you need to move them out of there before you put anything valuable back in that hole. And here's the thing, it's like, I find these kinds of outages very discouraging. And I kind of wonder, we should probably be depreciating our capital at a higher rate than we are if they're, the other thing that was said is that actually it turns out.
But wait a minute, Gordon, before you move on to that, off that
Yeah.
subject, most of that capital, meaning roughly $4 million of that capital, is owned by the light plant as the smart grid. We're just leasing fiber from them to run the broadband business. That's the way it's supposed to be. So it's actually the light plant that should be writing off that.
Gordon, I think you can stop sharing at the moment.
Okay. And then the other thing was that they claimed that actually overhead lines are more subject to this kind of damage than buried line. I thought that was interesting. But the point being that, how long does it take to recover from an outage like this? And I think it was said in Twitter that the tech had to do 250 fiber fusions or whatever.
Yeah, splices.
And then had to go splices, and then had to go back and do 250 again. And I just kind of have the sense that that's related in a broad way to how much effort it takes in order to install a line in the first place. So in other words, if we had a system where you could turn things around on a dime, then the backlog would disappear. These are all kinds of, multiple sides of the same coin in a way.
Yeah. Well, outside plant, which is, what we're referring to here, is always going to be susceptible to, environmental conditions and challenges of all kinds. The Losbrook Road is one of the roads that, goes out of town, and happens to be a road that has fiber coming from one of the upstream ISPs. By design, when we actually contracted with the various ISPs that we use, we intentionally made sure that they entered town on different, completely different paths. I mean, literally from opposite sides of the town. For the two who use CMLP fiber, and as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, one of the third one actually contracts with Verizon for fiber, which comes all the way to the central office. And there's a really good rationale for that, because what it makes it extremely unlikely that you're going to lose even multiple, let alone all of them, because you would have to have failures on opposite sides of the town concurrent with a third party who has their own complete infrastructure having a failure.
Yeah, I think we learned that from Braintree, where they identified that their two ISPs indeed had the same cable and the same trench, and the same backhoe got both of them.
Very bad. Very bad. But having said that, your point about animals is really, they are extremely frustrating and sort of go with the territory of this. And the electric guys are always happy to remind the telecom folks that at least when a squirrel gets involved with their stuff, it's usually a one-time event. Unfortunately, not so much with fiber. And there are other animals, including ants, that will occasionally get at fiber. And, so I have some sympathy for that. And it is interesting that, and it's not the first time I've heard this, because I think it happened to us in one other event that occurred, that, you know, an animal did damage and it wasn't possible to verify, you know, and they just come back because it's their home and, you know, try to work their way in. So but I think that the response you got to your question when you asked it was right. Procedurally, they need to look at how do you make sure when you've seen that event happen that you actually do some level of monitoring or increased deterrence to try to make sure that, you know, that same point isn't immediately attacked again, because there is a higher likelihood of that in the fiber side. Anyway, so I think the reason I wanted to cover the broadband budget a bit was to highlight the fact that A, it's done, and so we should understand it. B, it does have a capital plan that starts to look at a couple of topics that we were talking about, like, you know, I'm interested to see that there's a provision for further conduit construction and a 5-year outlook for that. I didn't ask the question, and now I kind of wish I had, sort of what was the basis for understanding the funding available to support the capital plan. So now that I'm thinking about it, it would be a really good question to say, okay, so you have one, but, you know, what are the assumptions that underlie how that gets funded? Because if we were to, say, propose out of this work that there should be a line item in that capital plan for fiber completion, how much resources would be available for that? I think that's where that would turn up in the work that we're doing. So any comments on that part?
I just say that most of the occurrences of that word, it occurs 17 times, is in the context of electrical distribution.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, just briefly looking back at that, let me pull it back up just because I think it is important. So that here. So the telecom, oops, sorry, wrong one. Let me close that because that's not it. They look too much alike. Yeah, that one. So funded in 22 for $625,000, in 23 for $400,000, 24 for 800 and 800. So presumably that expense needs to come from some kind of balance sheet. So that gives us some idea that at least, you know, 2 years from now, there's an expectation that it might go. The rest of this capital plan, by the way, is these sort of overhead conductor and distribution services and O&Ts. Those are pretty much the capital that goes along and supports that sort of steady state installation pace.
aren't O&Ts in the home?
Yeah, they're capitalized. So those are basically the cable modems.
But they're still owned by the broadband business.
Yeah, they are. So that would be kind of the distribution plant is the, you know, 300,000 or so, 375,000 is kind of the normal run rate.
From a demarcation point, they would consider the Ethernet cable coming out of the ONT as being the point which the customer takes responsibility.
Okay.
So that gives us some idea of, you know, how much in the way of resources potentially is available for. So we're talking about, you know, a few $100,000 for capital projects even now. And that's worth understanding. In short, without obviously, borrowing against it, and recognizing that return. And the return that they were planning was about 15%, 12 or 15%. Okay. So we used a fair amount of time on that, but I do think it's a pretty important part of the core understanding of the business. I had thought, let's see, we dove right into that, but just a brief reminder, we talked about it last week. We'll meet again next Thursday on January 6th, I believe, and I still have the same typo, I apologize. Should have said January 13th, not 12/13. And no meeting on the 20th because of the conflict with special town meeting. And then David, I believe you had said you might not be available on the 27th.
I'm flying out on the 27th, yes.
All right, so we'll come back around to what we're going to do about that. But is there anything else that, from previous meetings that anybody wanted to talk about before we sort of use the last half hour or so for the, furthering the discussion about the preliminary outline?
There's something I was thinking about, and we've talked a little bit about advertising or marketing, and I got this email, probably you folks got it too. It came directly from Jan, a CD at the Concord Light, and the subject line was, win a $76 gift card when you try out the 2-minute drive and save wizard. There's a raffle, and then there's, have you thought about heat pumps? And I just, I never get anything like that for broadband. And I wonder, is there like a fund, like a special fund that is driving these types of emails? Because I'm sure they get some people responding to those. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's, does anyone else have any thoughts around that?
It was typically known as the CARES Fund. And I think 1.5% assessment is on the size of your bill is added to the bill to pay for CARES. Turns out that actually the light plant spends about double the amount collected out of other funds to pay for things like energy improvements, rebates, that sort of thing. But there's nothing equivalent on the telecom side.
So what does CARES stand for?
I don't recall.
But
it's
it's
basically
something to do with energy savings or
energy efficiency.
Efficiency, okay.
And they actually stopped using that specific term. But I think they're a little bit afraid to promote telecom with such a large backlog.
Right.
Like it would only frustrate people.
Hey, Gail. Yeah, that's interesting. I went and looked while you were talking, and I couldn't find that email, and it's surprising.
I got it on December 17th.
Yeah, I got it also, Gail.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean,
I get it. They don't want to be advertising when they don't feel like they can help people. So I don't know, something we should address in our report for sure.
Well, if they want to do 350 installs next year, I don't think that's going to. I mean, this is my take. They're not going to do it by being benign. So they're going to have to do a little bit of marketing to get 350, even if they. I mean, if I was thinking about ways to get 350, I would approach my existing customers and offer a $75 to $100 referral. To existing customers, little simple things like that.
Does anybody still get a paper bill from CMLP?
Yeah.
Utility?
Yeah, I do too, even though Yeah.
Do they say anything? I went
No.
to electronic billing, so consequently, unless I log into the portal, I never see it, but
There's always a little marketing piece inside,
yeah.
but I've never, and it may be unfair to say I've never noticed anything. But my
That
memory
stuff is-
is I've never noticed anything.
That stuff's like catnip to me. Anyway, but I've always been a big fan of the flyer. You
Yeah.
can see I didn't open this one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's about as far as we went in the early going. But I would say that there was a buzz about doing it in the first place, and getting to the first 1,000 or so customers was it was on the upswing. And now I think that I agree with you, David. I think it's hard to assume that without some at least communication that says, hey, the backlog's gone.
Right.
We can get you installed if you just come up and order it. I don't quite see how a backlog of 150 turns into 350 installations next year.
It's basically 500 if you look at the backlog plus 350.
Yeah, and they're not. I think they were pretty clear that they're counting clearing the backlog in the 350.
Oh, okay. So it's
Well, put it this
200.
way, if you've got 10 months and you can do 30 a month, that's 300.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think Scott read it out earlier. I think 317 is the record, and that was back in 2017.
Yeah.
I think it was 2016.
Yeah.
It feels a little aggressive, but maybe, hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there could be
325 in 2016, excuse me.
maybe
And
there could be a targeted, I don't know, campaign. Well, I guess it's sort of a campaign to the people who have the fiber on their streets and who, where it's a pretty easy install,
Scott, was 2016 the ramp year?
No. So if you want, I can share this with you.
Go ahead, Scott.
And I'm going to, while I'm doing this, I'm going to give you a quick warning. The version I'm sharing with you now, the things in green are numbers that I calculated afterwards. So I actually needed to check the data that I got in the table. I just had the year, number of accounts connected, total capitalized cost, and the cost per. I got this from Greg. You can see my notes over on the right here. And what was interesting to me about that was that they, and by the way, of course, they may have changed how they capitalize the cost, but the install to a given customer is a capitalized cost, including the labor as well as the opticals and the O&T.
Right.
So one of the things that I thought was fascinating about this, and I couldn't imagine how this was, is that the number went way down here, and particularly in 2020. And maybe that's because this represents reconnections of equipment that was already installed or things of that nature. I just don't understand that part of it. But here were the numbers. And so the first year, the first year was the stub year because we didn't start this until it was approved in 2013 at town meeting. So they got 9 installs in that calendar year, and then you can see the numbers as they go along.
Yeah, 2014, I'd say that I think that the project really got going about the middle of 2014 or thereabouts, certainly 4 or 5 months in.
Yeah. And then what I did here is I just tried to calculate the revenue, and what I had mentioned before. I used 6 months for the current year and the full year for all the predecessors, just to see what kind of revenue that we should have seen. And by the way, it's interesting that number pretty much coincides with the revenue that they claim they're getting now. It was $1.1 million, $1.2 million in that range, so it's right in there. So anyway.
Okay.
Great, that's a great model.
It's very useful. So, but I think to your question, Gail, that is an example. I think it's an example of the kind of marketing that's possible. It's an example of the fact that CMLP does in fact understand how to do some marketing. I made the comment, I think might have been last week. I was in the director's report is at not yesterday's light board meeting, but the previous one. There was a question about the effectiveness of, I think, the air source heat pump program. And, the director was able to respond with some really useful statistics, like 30% of everybody who contacts us has a plan to install within 60 days of contact, which is a perfect understanding of your sales pipeline from my perspective. And if something like that were also in place for the broadband business, I think it would represent the focus that's needed to grow the business to additional profitability. Okay. So that was a good point, and I think that's actually a pretty good jumping off point for us to talk a little bit. So last week I introduced this idea of the preliminary outline. It was distributed with last week's meeting minutes, and then earlier this week I distributed the version that I kind of updated on the fly with the idea that we might I suggested that we could adopt sections as individual members of the task force and try and develop them out. And then when we thought we had made some progress, share that, or even maybe adopt those sections in pairs and work on them, because two people working on one thing at a time is not an open meeting law problem, and then come back with an eye towards sort of beginning to identify the areas that would ultimately end up in our report about the state of the business and what the opportunities are, and then the recommendations. And we had agreed, and it is reflected in the minutes that you produced, that I would take a stab at section 1, which was basically a description of the existing fiber, the served and unserved areas. In fact, maybe I'll bring this up just so that we're know what we're talking about. And then I think Scott had suggested that he would work on section 2, which is the broadband service fundamentals, and some of it is understanding the budget and the growth of that. And I think, Gordon, you had said that you would be willing to begin to work on section 3, which was the service growth opportunities. Am I right?
Yeah. And I thought that maybe, I haven't really started it yet, but what I thought I would do in order to avoid writer's block is begin by just searching through all of these minutes that we've been so diligent in keeping up to date. That'll be a great resource. So I'll be looking for the word growth for every week since, when did this start? September?
Yeah, it's linked on our page, but I think the first meeting was September 15th.
Yeah. So that may actually be more data than I need, but at least it'll jog my memory.
And then I thought that the section that we would probably most want to focus on in these meetings and as a group is, what ends up in recommendations. And so at least what I had envisioned was that we would plan to write some background sections. These are things that anybody following this work needs to know and understand about, what fiber do we have and where don't we have fiber and how many are we talking about and why don't we have fiber in some of these places, and just try and get that fact set down and maybe point at some of the potential opportunities there. Likewise, here's the business, runs off subscriptions. It has capable of generating approximately this much cash, whatever the answers seem to be there. This is how much debt it has, and this is how much debt it's authorized to have, so that we get that basic fact set down. And then as we try and point at, and this is where I think it's useful to have a laundry list, what policies, what are the de facto policies and what are the actual policies that appear to be in place around the business? And then how do we, what if any formal policy changes or what policies should need to be adopted. And there may be different choices. I always go to the universal access one. There's a bunch of different ways we could come down on that. We might want to, this is where my comment last week about pros and cons. You got to get to every single premise universal access policy. There's the ones that are practical universal access policy. And there might be any number of others in between that. And so I thought if we started with a list of those, then we could potentially try for size or try for fit. This is the policy. This is how we think it makes sense for the town to go about adopting a policy. Is it the light board? Is it the select board? Does it need town meeting action or not? Where do we think that the next step should be taken? So that was kind of what I was after. Thoughts and comments now that I think all of you have had a chance to think about it at least a little.
I think that's a good framework. I have some questions about specifics, but I don't want to take this top level discussion off track.
Mm-hmm. So let's go at the very high level. I'm recognizing that we're somewhere near the midpoint of the time that we have carved out in Article 41 to get to some report or conclusion by the time the next town meeting happens. And so I'm hoping that we have at least a consensus that if we sort of go down this road, we're beginning to at least frame what the work product that's required by Article 41 is going to do. And for those of you that haven't looked at this document, at the bottom of the document, there was an opportunity. I didn't scroll quite far enough for making recommendations about additional work. I think there's clearly going to be some things where we're going to sit there and say we either didn't have the resources or the mandate or the time to address these things, but we think they should be addressed, and maybe even here's how we think they should be addressed.
Well, here's a question, Mark, and pardon me for jumping in, but with regard to universal, in fact, I was having a conversation with someone who's not on the committee who actually thought that was what the committee charge was.
Yeah.
To actually design a path to universality. And so I guess my question is that, do you think that within this framework, there will be a place to answer the question? Well, that's the question would be, what does it take? What will it cost? Is it doable to actually put lit or unlit fiber on every door?
Right. I think we are. I'm happy to hear from others. My personal opinion is that we are being asked to answer that question.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I put in the minutes last week, which I said in the meeting was what are the areas that are underserved? The three kind of framework around this is what are the areas that are underserved? What would it cost roughly based on our time and resources to serve each of those underserved areas? And then the third part is how we might fund them. Those are the three pieces of how we might come to this. And I still think that holds.
Okay, and because I think it's a totally different question to address, say, 95% of the town. The costs are not there's a hook.
Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah,
and so yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But this is, I think Gail will probably weigh in, but my understanding of the article and the intent behind the article both was 100% access.
Did you see it that way, Gail?
I did, yes. I mean, and I've said this before, I don't think right now there is any plan for 100% access. And I think there should be some plan. And I'm not like our job, obviously we don't have purse strings. We can't make it happen, but we can explain what's required to make it happen. And if, and I don't think we have to judge the answer. Like, does it make sense? I mean, I guess we can make recommendations, but I think we need to get the facts and show how would we get to 100%? And then if town meeting says, well, gosh, this is awesome, we're gonna do it no matter what it costs, then that's up to town meeting, so, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is slightly different, that would it makes sense not only to get the what Gail just described was only the first part of that, which was, and the second part, which is what it would take and how much would it cost. The third part, maybe that's not in the charge per se, but I feel like it's an obvious piece of at least a recommendation that we would have is how might you fund it? And this goes back to the growing the subscribers, taking out a loan.
Sure, yeah, no, and funding is part of the charge.
Buying a lottery ticket.
Yeah, no, I didn't, no, I agree. The funding is part of the charge.
I don't think the cost is actually the only barrier.
Yeah,
right?
funding
can
hurdle.
speak to that. Right?
Well, and what are you referring to, Gordon?
That Concord Green just held a vote and said they don't want it.
Well, we don't want to, no, we don't want to bear the burden of paying for fiber at this point in time. And 100,000 is actually was an underestimate by significant dollars.
Yeah, so I don't think that's not our problem. That's not the light plant's problem. It's
Right.
just the way it
I
is.
mean, that's actually one point that I was thinking about. We would want to put front and center in our recommendations here. And I don't know who identified this, but it was really, I think it was perhaps Mark, but I'll just mention it, was we came to the conclusion here in our discussion that there is a paradigm that we have to deal with in certain situations, whereas the light plant on one side, there's a consumer on the other side, and there's a third party that sits between them that is a barrier. This is the general problem that we've identified, and it's characterized in multiple different ways, whether it's a homeowners association at Concord Green that collectively said they didn't want to put that in place, or is, whatever it is in Concord Muse or any other facility or any other situation where there's a party that's neither the light plant nor the end consumer that's in the middle of this conversation or in the middle of this decision to make the install. And what we do about that, I think this is first of all a problem that, at least in my mind, I don't think was clearly framed until we had that conversation. And we didn't start to think of it as these three parties with very different goals and motivations. And now we know that. I think it's become very clear. Then what recommendation comes out of that from us, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, and there's an even additional difficulty in that impasse, which is that let's say that there was only one resident at the condo that wanted it, and yet under these bylaws, which the town doesn't control, it would have to be installed into all of the others and go unused. So the cost picture is extremely adverse. It's a lot different than having one person on my street get it, because I don't have to get it. So, let me just throw this out. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I was wondering if the concept of eminent domain could play in this. I'm addressing that one person who can't get it because the cost of installing to them equals the unit cost times the number of units in the condo. And what if they, and that's because of the structure of the bylaw. So I'm just saying the town's law is also at play, and eminent domain, where there's actually a taking, is an example of where the interests of the town will exceed the interests of an individual landholder. Anyway, I don't want to really propose the use of legal force, so to speak, but what if the town said, look, we're going to go in there, we're going to supply that one person, and the condo board doesn't actually get a say in the matter. Now that sounds like trouble, doesn't it? Sounds like it'd be lawsuits. And all kinds of stuff.
It does sound like trouble. Yeah.
And I'm not even sure if it's even legally valid, but
I think Gail wanted to make a comment, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I haven't come across eminent domain for purposes of, I know we're not supposed to use the word utility, but I haven't come across it for utility installation. but it's often implemented for the public good. I mean, public benefit, public good is one of the criteria, I believe, in the use of eminent domain. So there could be something like that. And I think at some point, fiber is considered and can be considered so important that the costs, it's so much for one person, much less than for someone else. The state or the government just has to say, well, that's the way it is, and we have to deal with it. So I think there are some of those sort of jumps.
Well,
that can be made.
That's a different thing though. So that's a case where, and by the way, I still owe that model to this committee, even though the vote had taken place before I had a chance to do this, which is, let's say for conversation's sake that there were enough people in Concord Green that wanted the broadband. And if I tallied up the $1,500 that the broadband service would have spent to install an average customer, or whatever the number is, that's the average of that table I just showed you, and it's roughly somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 times the number of installs. If that was enough that I could go back to Concord Green and say, as a light plant, I'm going to put this conduit in at our expense and be at $200,000, because I'm going to harvest almost immediately 26, 30 customers, 50 customers, pick the number. That could be a scenario that we're talking about. And then the question that David would have to ask his constituents within Concord Green is, shall we allow light plant or broadband to do this install with zero cost to us? That's a totally different model for them, and they might all vote yes for zero cost, because the light plant would take that on as a business investment. I'm going to make this investment. I know that there's 50 customers sitting behind this investment. I'll throw $200,000 at it because it makes sense for some reason or other.
Yeah. And we're going to call that the investment model, and put that on the table as one of the potential solutions for the third party thing. And I think it's possible to kind of work out what the business parameters and some level of decision making that could be there. I want to back up. I want to take us back to the universal access thing, because I think we kind of, like we tend to, ended up on a specific case. There's an important definition that I think we need to make about what the criteria is a premise served. So if I'm thinking about any given single family home in the community that has a fiber running down the street and a splice case nearby, and maybe it's an overhead utility, the fact that individual homeowner doesn't decide to make the investment of $150 or even a piece of conduit across their property to enable them to have the fiber done is not that we still consider that premise served, because it's available, and we would do it based on our business rules. And I think that we may need to hair split on this topic a little bit for multi-dwelling units and say, if the fiber actually is capable of entering the property, and the property owner, who's what the person that at least this is the default policy that's in place with the light plant today. If the property owner says, well, I don't want it, okay, it's served, but they don't want it. And that's been the operating definition to this point. And now we're recognizing this problem, but what if that's not an individual? That property owner is not an individual, it's a group that is, has a significant minority, let's say, who feels differently. Then what do we do? And that's a classic, sort of democracy-driven problem. But this is why what I'm proposing we do in the report generation and recommendation generation portion of this is, I think if we can make the de facto policy that has been in place explicit and agree that is in fact how it's been operating so far, and these are the alternative to operating that way, and here's a decision-making process that might lead to behaving different, different outcomes, as it were, like some ability to go in. Like, for example, I mean, I hesitate to introduce Concord Green again, but let's just say that under a different set of circumstances, the light plant was allowed to go in and just hook up one customer in Concord Green at its own expense. Would that be a violation of Concord Green's?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah.
I can
Oh,
answer
That's
that.
why I proposed
The
this
answer is yes.
countervailing.
If I could just add something here, Mark, and I really because you want to be cautious. The survey that we took didn't say, and Joan, who's observing here, she's a member of our board. I think, Joan, you can attest to this. It didn't say we don't want broadband.
Right.
It said we don't want to pay the $100,000 expense, which, by the way, I'll reiterate, was too low.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the residents didn't say we're not interested in broadband. They said we're not interested in broadband at that cost.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important to differentiate that.
Yeah, and all I'm pointing out is that based on the de facto policy that's been in place so far, there's no difference between that and a single family homeowner who decides,
Right.
I don't want to pay for installation, so you don't serve me.
Right.
Now, we understand that if you peel it back a layer, there is kind of a difference because, maybe that person's kids really do want fiber, but they're not allowed to pay.
Right. And as you peel that layer back, then you have the HOA you've got to deal with, and rules and regs and docs and all those things that we have to struggle with or live with.
Yeah, but this is why what I'm sort of suggesting we do is let's try and as much as we can surface the policies as a way of getting at what the decision points are that maybe potentially lead to a different outcome, or at least analyzing whether or not there are other outcomes that could be achieved.
So I can think of two things to address some of the issues that David just described. And one is we've already discussed in the meeting, the idea of, hey, give us some money, right? And we could come up with that. We were talking earlier about the EV thing and CARES budget, which is a fund that accumulates. It's the undergrounding is actually what I'm thinking of. Okay, so the undergrounding could be a model. In fact, it might literally be for undergrounding, but for telecom. That's one thing. The other thing is that David, you said that the bid was revised upward, right? So there's cost issues. So it would be a very big change in policy for the light plant, or for the broadband division. But what if the broadband division developed a business doing the undergrounding, doing that last 100 feet, and then you get a more consistent billing experience, and you'd also have the potential of developing expertise and experience and a cost curve that we would benefit from, and the homeowners wouldn't be at the mercy of the yellow pages and who knows who they're contracting with. So that could actually address a number of what do they call those barriers to
entry. Yeah, you want to call them that. Yeah, just to add to it, Gordon. I mean, and our initial estimate was 100,000, and that's the number we took to our residents. As we were getting quotes for our paving, the quotes for conduit laying 4-inch pipe are $70, $75, and $80 a foot. We estimated that we needed approximately 5,000 feet of conduit. Even if you lower that to 3,000 feet, just lower it, you're talking 200. I can't do that in my head, but you're at 200,000 for the conduit.
David, you mentioned that 70, 75, and 80 dollars per
three-
foot, and
three-
and how many feet initial, and then you downed it road?
Well, I'm saying we initially guesstimated by some measuring, 5,000 feet, because that would run all around the property. But I said, even if you lower that to 3,000 feet, just for the sake of math. So 3,000 times the average, you had a 70, 75, and 80, take the midpoint, 75 times 3,000, that brings the number, if you're calculating, to 200, and I can't do that in my head, I'm sorry.
I'll do it for you. Give me a
Thank
second.
you. Appreciate, I was hoping you would do it for me.
3,080 is going to be 240,000.
So that's what it
220,
would,
225.
that would cost us if we were laying the conduit.
And by the way, the
I'm still,
undergrounding effort by the town of Concord, for the power distribution where we underground the power, that's
Yeah.
$1 million a mile.
Yeah.
So that's about double the $80 you just quoted.
Yeah.
But there's
We
a
were-
lot more to it, it's
Right, but
electrical.
we
Yeah.
were shocked when we got the quote.
but David, just to
Yeah.
peel the onion just a little more about that, how deep were they putting the conduit?
Well, it's I can't tell you the depth, but since we're stripping all the road surfaces away, putting on a new base, whatever coat. So I don't know that depth, but it would be deep enough so that we could lay a whole new road. I don't know the exact depth.
So the intention was to lay it down the middle of the road or under the road?
We'll lay it, yes, and then feed it into each appropriate building.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Just curious for my notes. Thank you.
Discussion
Yep.
as,
Okay,
as
Sorry.
support
I'm
for the
going on.
work plan as proposed.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to read that whole discussion as support for the work plan as proposed. So-
I think
My notes don't capture all that, Mark, and I hope you
Yeah,
don't count on them.
I know. Well, what I'm saying is it's important. And I think the sooner we write it down, the sooner it becomes possible to
Yeah.
move the discussion rather than revisit it.
So let me go back to something I wanted to request. I actually had started the work on my section based on a snapshot from the PDF. And then I remember that you'd sent around the Word document, and
Yeah.
I couldn't open it.
Okay.
Could you do me a huge favor and just save it as a rich text file on .rtf?
Sure.
For some
Yeah.
reason, my version of Word choked on it, maybe because there was a macro in it or something, but I
Yeah.
tried
or-
twice.
I think
Just
I'm
one-
defaulting to one of the latest versions of Word, so it may just be, but I'm
Yeah,
happy to, and for anybody else, what I did with it was I basically copied the document and started working at least a little bit on section 1, expanding that. And, I would say just pick up a section or, make some contributions. I particularly want to encourage everybody to take a look at the recommendations area and see what other types of things, think of it as things we should be taking a position on, or things that there's a position that needs to be taken on, and we're just making a list. I'm not asking you to unless you really want to articulate what you think the position should be. I'm just saying these are things that, that should be thought about, and ultimately, there's going to be a description of the issue, and if we have a recommendation, great. If we don't have a recommendation, that's, at least we've left the breadcrumbs for the next group that decides to try to move the ball forward on this.
if I can add this, I feel a little unqualified to be writing the major sections, but Gordon, if you'd like some help on your section, I'd happily help you out.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Okay.
David.
You're welcome.
And Mark, I have a question. I found an email from you with the document,
Yeah.
and it's a OneDrive.
Oh,
Is
really?
that what you? Yeah, it's OneDrive. Oh, well, maybe it's mine. I don't know. Maybe it ended up. Maybe it's just okay. Forget it. That was because we
I
don't
thought I
want to
just
collaborate.
attached the docx file, but
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
if
right.
anybody, like I said in that email, I think I said, if anybody has any difficulty opening it, needs it in a different format, just reply to me, and I will definitely send you a version. You
All
know,
right, I think I
convert it to
have it.
something
Never
else.
mind my question.
Okay, great. So with that, and noticing that it's already 8:12, time flies when you're having fun with fiber. does anyone have anything else that they would like to either suggest that we definitely cover next week? Otherwise, we'll return to the discussion about these sections and maybe take a look at what work people have been able to apply to that. And I would take public comments if there's no questions from the task force. Okay, great. Joan and then Terry.
Oh, thank you. Terry, would you care to go, please?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And I think that Gordon had a good point about the 95%. I think that your chart, the definition of universality would be 100%. However, I think there is going to be, I don't remember what you said, Gordon, a hook or whatever.
Yeah.
The last 5% might cost the most. And I think this is information that we also want to know so that people can make an informed decision. So you guys outlined, let's see, a plan, cost, a time frame, and how do you fund it? We might want to know that for 100% and also for 95%, so we can make an informed decision.
Yeah, thanks. It occurred to me that I think some level of what do we think is going to happen if nothing changes is a really good place to start with that. Like how, is it forever, or would it eventually be done with no change in direction? So some kind of low case, best case, and high case, I think make sense to me. I always think that it's a good idea to put alternatives in front of the town.
Right, definitely.
So
Yep.
Thank you for that commentary.
Thank you.
Yeah. Joan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just to mention, the owner's response and so on, that was to the survey. I think I mentioned previously, David had talked about it. The survey was limited in that it was emailed only, and only to those Concord Green residents who have consented to share their email with the HOA. So it was limited. But I do agree with David that it appears to us that the decision point in that survey probably centered on cost. It was put rather bluntly in the survey, and again, that seems to be the touchstone, and we might get a completely different response, even the limited response that there was from the email response. That's all there was. So it might be, if it's a piece of information that's helpful, that's great. It might be helpful to the committee. And I just want to mention at the open meeting of the HOA, there were some residents, again, we're all, town of Concord residents, but there were some residents who voiced, one person voiced that she did not fully understand what broadband was. And she said some of her neighbors didn't either, so even if they got this or got some sort of questionnaire or something, they really didn't have the background on it. So I don't know if this would come under marketing or public education campaign or what have you, but just to mention it, because it's really, really important to get the information out. I can attest to that, having observed the meetings here, how informative and educational it has been to listen and gain a better understanding of it, and how really how important it is to our community. So again, just a couple thoughts. Thanks so much, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, I would definitely say that before the light plant did its outreach, I'd never heard of an air sourced heat pump, and now I own 2 of them. So that's maybe a good parallel to that. Joan, well, your comment made me wonder about something. Actually, so is it fair to think of the survey as kind of a straw poll, and the actual decision of the HOA would actually be something that would take place in something like an open meeting of the HOA if there was a proposal to either do or not do this. Is that a fair way to think about?
I think so, Mark. I do. I think that's about what it amounted to. Trying to get a little bellwether, an indication. It was not binding on the board, and the board, to be clear, the board has not taken any vote on
Okay.
this.
Just, if I can just add a few facts, out of 221 units, we have 213 emails. So it went to 213 residents. So we're not lacking emails. We just wanted to get, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, get put our kind of finger in the air and, you know, kind of find out what was going on. But I do think the issue, as Jonas pointed out, if we've said it's free, should we move forward? I think the response would have been, well, why not? Even if you knew nothing about broadband, you would have said, of course. But it's not, and I think the cost is the major issue. Just from a process standpoint, the board can approve any expense, but the board doesn't approve any expense because we have a budget to live by and, you know, other expenses that we have to think about.
Okay. Good. I see Carlin raised her hand. Thanks for joining us, Carlin. You're on mute. Oh, we still can't hear you.
I still can't do this right.
There
2
you
years.
go.
You think
There
I'd
you go.
figure this out? Carlin Reed, 83 Woods End. Sorry about that. Will one of your recommendations be to have a committee or committee oversight over broadband going forward, just in general?
This committee member will want to put that in. Let me just say that. This is Scott Hopkinson speaking.
I feel similarly, although I would place it. One of the things that's on our list is already governance, and I believe that there is a level of governance that is in place. I think that clarifying that and making it a little bit more explicit would probably be very helpful, because I think that there are areas of responsibility, certainly for the light board, potentially for the select board, and obviously for town meeting around what happens in the broadband business. And so I think that clarifying that is a important thing to do, or at least making it as explicit as possible.
One quick follow-up. Perhaps I overstated. I wasn't sure if I should say broadband oversight, because I think that's what the light plant does. But community input over broadband. Look at what happened with the recent broadband outages, how much input the community has had in different sources. Perhaps a more directed focus through a committee would help the light plant oversee the broadband institution. Just a suggestion. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, it is. I made a comment last week, and it's reflected in our minutes that, at various points in time, some discussion about whether or not there should be some type of citizens technology advisory group, or whether even that might eventually morph with the PEG Access Committee, which I know Carlin chairs, was something that's been on the table off and on in the past, and probably worth us at least opining on if we can come to a consensus.
What technology? What was it? Technology? What?
I think some kind of technology advisory board, or
Citizens Technology Committee, I think is what you call
right.
it.
By the way, there was in the history of our town, there was a separate cable television committee that existed for some period of time.
Yeah.
And it took up the subject of broadband for a period of time before Mark and I worked on it.
Yeah. And was kind of, I think that a lot of the results of their work was what got the votes in front of town meeting to authorize CMLP to enter the telecom business in the first place.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I did the work for the town, one of the things I found was previous reports and commission studies that were done for that committee around the subject of bringing broadband to the town.
Yeah, and I view it as, now that it's a going concern, I think that it does make sense for us to think about what the long-term goals are and what are the sort of governance mechanisms that get us there.
Yeah, so I mean, Mark, just to expand a little more, this may be something that sits under the recommendations and under the general subject of governance. I do want to redress one thing, David, because we talked about this, and also Joan. At our last meeting, David agreed to send around a copy of the survey.
Right. And I've asked the secretary or assistant assistant woman who works for our office to get a clean copy and get it out to me so I can get it out to you, and you'll get it.
Yeah, just was
The
curious.
holidays have kind of upset that pattern.
Got it. I just didn't want to lose it because I did want to take a peek at it. Thanks.
It's been on my head while you guys have been chatting.
Okay.
Yeah,
There-
just one, if I may, Mark, one further point on
Sure.
that, I think on that survey anyway, as I recall, and David, please correct me, the response, I thought the response rate actually was it certainly, it was around 100, if any.
105 or 106.
Yeah, so about not even half the units. So
Yeah.
again, it puts it in perspective.
Sure. Okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Very good.
All
Okay.
right, I'm getting ready to go.
Yeah, I think we've kind of pushed a little bit longer than we normally do. But thanks for hanging in. And again, I think that any suggestions and feedback, or pick a section or come up with some notes, and we'll try to I think we will spend virtually the whole time next time, because I don't think that much is going to happen in between that we need to cover on this notion of framing what are the specific areas that we may want to dive into and begin to report on and frame. And if anybody has any further thoughts about what's required and maybe what should be deferred on sort of completion criteria for what we're doing, I think this is a good time to do it, because we have enough time left to properly address things. But I think if we sort of leave something out at this point, we may find ourselves in a crunch towards the end. So I appreciate your thoughts on that subject, and I look forward to hearing from everybody about that next Thursday.
I move that we close the meeting.
Thank you,
Second.
Scott.
Who seconded it?
Gordon.
Yeah, got it done already.
Okay. So I'll take a roll. Any discussion about leaving? Didn't think so. Okay, Gordon.
Aye.
Scott.
Aye.
David. Yeah.
Aye.
And myself, aye. So meeting's adjourned at 8:25. Thank you, and have a happy new year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Two.